Okay, so thank you all for joining us today for our first inaugural Social Mobility Lab Summit. I'll tell you a little bit more about the agenda in a second, but I'm really grateful for everyone to show up today. But to properly kick things off and welcome us, I'd like to ask Vince Boudreau, President of City College of New York, to join us, and we're honored to have him here today. So thank you very much.
Well, listen, right at the start, I want to turn that around a little bit and thank Bob Mckinnon for all the work that he's done. This is a project that early on captured his imagination. He has put it on his shoulders, and we are so grateful for your enthusiasm for this project and your leadership for it. And I also want to thank the people from Kimball who have been sponsors and partners for this. It means a great deal, especially in this moment, to have people in the world who believe in social mobility and equality for all and access and all the things that we've stood for at City College for almost 180 years now. This is exciting for a number of reasons, and I'll start with the thing that drove a lot of my enthusiasm years and years ago, where I thought, around issues like immigration, around issues like social mobility, we have assets and expertise in our faculty, in our researchers, also in the lives and lived experiences of our students that needs to go out. Early on, when we were talking about why the Colin Powell School made sense, and in the inaugural video, one of the things that I said, at the time when stop and frisk was this robust thing that happened to people in New York City, that the conversation around that was different if you're in a room with people who are routinely stopped and frisked. And that conversation doesn't happen in a lot of places that are sort of policy oriented. And I think the same can be said with questions of immigration. The same absolutely can be said around questions of social mobility. So becoming a place that isn't just kind of teaching the canon to our own community, but becomes a center of expertise for people who are interested in things that matter on this campus and that have worked on this campus is huge. And what's beautiful about this program is not just that it centers attention on one of the things that we are most proud of and that we devote most energy to, but it's also doing it in a way that brings the collaborative expertise of faculty from across our departments in the Colin Powell School, across the college and across CUNY, to center on something that we talk about all the time. You can't really get a speech from a CUNY leader that doesn't talk about social mobility. And so why not, instead of just touting what we're doing, number one, try to figure out why we do it as well as we do, how we can do it better, and I think especially in this moment, what difference it makes for the society we live in, that there are engines of social mobility. Years ago, when Andy was, I think you were in Roosevelt at the time, it might have been Truman, it was one of your first chapter City College gigs that you had. You were introducing Joseph Stiglitz. And you said something that I've quoted probably 150 times since then. And I attribute it to Joseph Stiglitz, not to you, but I'll attribute it to you now since you're here. And quoting Stiglitz, he said, if you are socially mobile in American society at the time, still today, you're a statistical anomaly. And I think Kevin Foster added the second part of the quote, which is now not Andy's, but Kevin's, which is, except if you're a student on a campus of a public university in the United States. Like, that's the place where we still get social mobility, kind of the way it used to look in the 1950s and the 1960s. And you think about everything that we face today, politically, in terms of federal policy, and the kind of vision of diversity and equity and inclusion that accompanies that. And the vision is, you can't do something for somebody who doesn't have very much unless you're taking it away from people who have been historically privileged. This idea of a zero-sum conflict between people who have been included and people who have been excluded only works in a society without social mobility. You know, the whole point of social mobility is we're expanding the pie. We're giving people a level chance, or people are acquiring through their own efforts, a level chance just by working hard and focusing on their careers and being educated and thinking about what it means to be a full citizen in our society, to do better in their life. And everybody can do that. It is not a zero-sum conflict. And I take one of the kind of signal contributions of this center at this moment is to make that point in the lives, you know, in talking about the lives of our students, in talking about the mission of places like City College, but specifically City College, and in harnessing the expertise of the faculty and the students and the researchers who are gathered here. So I want to, you know, end once again by thanking you, Bob, for all of you for supporting this work, for the faculty that have decided to take your research expertise and join forces to make this point. I think it is not just a great thing for the campus. I think it's essential for our country and for the future of democracy. And so thank you for being here. Thank you for your support, and let the games begin. And thank you for that.
Okay, so hard act to follow. In the spirit of a lab, I wanted to point out a couple of things. Today's meeting is designed as an experiment. So we'll be doing some things, asking for your participation in ways that maybe you aren't accustomed to, seeing parts of the presentation that sort of are different from maybe a traditional academic conference. This really requires participation. We're here to generate ideas, to learn together, and to find ways to sort of promote more social mobility. So in terms of the formal agenda, I want to start first by thanking everyone who is here. Vince welcomed myself. Thank you for the kind words. He also thanked our partners at Kyndryl, who have been really wonderful as partners. We're also supported by the Friedman Family Foundation, as well as a generous grant from to the Colin Powell School from the Ford Foundation. And our latest funder, I think, if he's not on jury duty, is actually joining us through livestream, which is the Gambrill Foundation. So obviously your work makes all this possible. There's the faculty and the research that is being done here, that has been done in this place long before there was a lab. So I wanted to acknowledge that there's so much work that's been done and research. We're just happy to provide a home for more of it. So thank you for all of the faculty, and I'll talk a little bit more about our grantees in a moment. I want to thank, there's some students in the room today, so we're excited to have them. This is all about them and the communities they represent. I also want to give a shout out to the staff at the Colin Powell School, the people in communications, so you'll see in this beautiful presentation, worked tirelessly to put this into shape. So thank you to Jose, Namrata, Ari, for your tremendous work. We have two RAs at the lab who are sitting back there, Liberty and Hannah. I want to thank them for their contributions. We have an advisory council who has been helping us in steering what we're doing here, which is wonderful. Daniel, where is he? Back in the back. He is making sure all this stuff runs, the program manager at the lab, which is wonderful. I'm sure I'm forgetting someone, but I do have an opportunity to get up here several more times. I will not forget, however, Dean Andy Rich. And so I want to thank him so much for his partnership in this. The lab would not be here if he wasn't such a guiding force, not only in making it happen, but answering all of the trivial and interesting questions that I ask him each day about how to navigate a lab inside of an academic institution. So I will miss him tremendously when he's gone on a lot of different fronts. And I could not be more grateful for everything you've done. And you will hear from him appropriately later in the day when we close things out. So welcome. I'll talk a little bit about why we're here. We're going to hear from two students today and center their lived experience and the work that moves forward. The sessions that we have been designed after that, where we're going to bring groups of our current grantees up, and they're going to each give a 10-minute presentation. A 10-minute presentation, and then after that, we're going to ask you all to sort of reflect on what you just heard. We're going to prompt you some questions, and hopefully that will lead to some ideas we can sort of, capture and share back and inform the work moving forward. We'll take a quick break for lunch, and then we're going to repeat that 2 more times, and then Andy will bring us home. Sound good? Great. But basically, quickly about the lab. I mean, the point of the lab is definitely to just try to do what we can through a lot of different activities to basically find ways to discover and accelerate social mobility amongst our students, the communities they represent, and, and the nation as a whole. We really believe this could be an integral center for trying to make sure that we are, as we say, and you'll see again on the slide in a second, the only reason to study social mobility is to create more of it, and that's what we're hoping to accomplish. This is the current group of grantees, most of which you will hear today. So thank you very much. We're excited about what you've learned in a year. We kicked this off in a meeting in this room about a year ago, so we're excited to welcome them all here. We also will be announcing shortly, some of them are in the room, some will be on live stream, but we essentially just are about to announce our next round of grantees. So we were excited that our first round was essentially inside of CUNY, and our next round was a nationwide search. We got tremendous amount of proposals in. We're sad to have to sort of turn a few of them away, but welcome them here today, online or in person, and excited to be working with you moving forward. So in terms of just the approach of the lab, we look at it as sort of a virtuous circle, where we look to learn, translate what we're learning, and then engage audiences what we've heard. And so this translation component is really sort of critical. There's so much work that's been done, not just in this lab, but across the country, on issues of social mobility. But often it's locked behind a paywall or in a journal, and it doesn't quite get to the hands of the students and the communities who could both use it. And so that's what we're really trying to sort of do with this model. Now, what we've done is twofold. As I mentioned before, we've got grants that we have sent out, and you'll hear from some of them today. And what we're also doing is acknowledging how much work has already been done. So through the heroic efforts of Hannah and Liberty back there, we have been basically gleaning existing research to see what's out there. We have compiled 75 different studies, which I'll tell you a little bit more about in a second. And it's all simply done by this form, which we are using internally, but we could use externally as well. We're asking simple questions in 1 or 2 sentences. What does someone need to know about this research? Who needs to know about it? And do you have any ideas for engaging them in it, right? So this form was filled out 75 times by Hannah, right? Each with a different piece of research. Then, as a quick look, it was created or then transposed into this spreadsheet, where we're taking the main findings, all kinds of different research, everything about sort of like the role of mentors or whether you should sleep or the way in which we greet students in the classroom. And yes, this is meant for effect. Please don't try to follow. It's meant just to show you that that's 75 in studies, interesting studies with such important research that we cannot wait to sort of share. And so how will we be sharing this? In the fall, we plan to kick off a campaign internally with our students, but accessible to anyone outside as well. So here's just an example of how this information gets translated. So speak up, your voice matters. Your teachers and peers want to hear your thoughts. There is a concept called self-silencing, where essentially kids don't speak up because they don't feel like their voices matter. Unfortunately, that means that people who are in front of a classroom or in an office, in front of a meeting, feel as if they're then disengaged, which is not the case. And so we want to make sure that we are bringing to light issues like this, that your voice matters, and that there is a thing that you share with a lot of other people. We all self-silence at different points, and so you're not alone. Another thing is ideas for moving up. Do you correct people when they mispronounce your name? Now imagine this being on an Instagram story, right? And how many people, now my name is Bob, so that doesn't happen a whole lot. But I know that there are certainly cases where people's names are mispronounced. And it's also a truth that if you see someone whose name is hard to pronounce, you have a tendency to call on them less. And so it's imperative for both students to know that this thing exists, as well as for faculty to be aware of it. And speaking of faculty, another example, another piece of research, is the idea of how we choose to greet someone in a classroom. If someone isn't smiling, give them one of yours. So this is an example of a post that would appear on LinkedIn. And it's from a study that basically shows things like eye contact and smiling and welcome people upon the time they enter the classroom makes a difference for how they then engage. It actually even correlates to improved grades in the classroom. So these cues that we give to our students and our faculty are important. They are simplifications of important research that is done but maybe has not been shared. And so it's this idea of translation I mentioned before that is so critical to what we're trying to do. And just to show you the power of this, you saw that sort of like, spreadsheet with like 75 sort of like different studies on it. In a classroom, in the class I teach, the economics of social mobility, earlier this semester, I basically shared this with my students, and I gave them less than an hour to pick a study that they identified with, and then after identifying with that study, to create a video that they might share on TikTok or on Instagram that was essentially like the way in which they might recommend, a restaurant to a friend. And so, this is rough, but this is something that someone just did on the spot because they identified with it.
I'm a student
Can you turn up the volume, please?
rarely gets the right amount of sleep. I might sleep between 5 to 3 hours a night, and one time when I had a very difficult class called construction technology, I told the teacher that I was up all night studying and only got 2 hours of sleep, and they looked at me crazy and told me that I'm better off getting sleep instead. I didn't do too well on that test, but when I decided to get a full night's rest the next test, and mind you, this was a very hard subject for me, I somehow did better. And it's simply because studies have shown that you do better getting a full night's rest instead of staying awake and studying. And you're going to be way less groggy, you're going to be way more functional and be able to call back on things that you even learned during class. So I recommend it. Get sleep instead. Sleep is better.
So that's Miles from my classroom. The thing about Miles, too, it's interesting, is every time we kick off our class, we go around the room and we want to know how everyone's showing up. So we say, give us one word to describe how you're feeling. And the number of synonyms they come up for tired is pretty impressive, because they're staying up late, they're coming straight from work, they have early shifts, right? And so this is a reality in terms of a message that's important to sort of reinforce again and again and again. But beyond this, again, this is just an example, in the spirit of a lab, of putting sort of accessible information in front of the people who could use it and see what they can do to translate that and share it with their peers and others. And as I mentioned before, we're all doing this in the service of the only reason to study social mobility, we believe, is to create more of it, right? And who do we want to create that for? And so I'm going to ask two of my students to come up right now. Sai, I see you back there. Vanessa, if you could both come up here and take a chair. To set this up, the class is structured so that they are basically going through a journey on social mobility. And it starts by them essentially talking about sort of like, how they ended up in the classroom in the first place. And so you're going to hear Sai's first essay. You girls won't need that. It's going to be right here, so you're going to use this. You're fine. And it's the first essay, which is basically, hey, we do a lot of work like thinking about the headwinds and tailwinds that affected your journey. And the second one is talking about the way we think about that journey and the psychology of it. So you're going to hear two different essays from two different points. And typically this would be the part of a presentation where you might invite a keynote and you'd have a famous author. And we thought it was more appropriate to take two great writers right in our midst and give them a chance to share their story. So Sai, if you would come up first, and I do have a copy of yours.
Thank you.
Students here at the Colin Powell School of Civic and the Colin Powell School. And today I'll be sharing an essay that I wrote as an analysis of a lot of the biases that I've learned throughout the course of the Economics of Social Mobility class that I'm taking this semester with Bob Mckinnon, and how that reflects and how I see that in my life. Social mobility. How is it that some are able to achieve it while others don't? From our class discussions, it looks as though parts of the answer resides in how we and the people around us view social mobility. Metaphors for social mobility, biases, and othering, among others, can have a great impact on someone's ability to achieve it, perhaps explaining why my cousins from the same family, culture, and neighborhood have all experienced social mobility in unique ways. perspective of the self. The path was made clear to me from the start. Do well in elementary school, get out of the ESL program, and get into a good middle school. Do well in middle school, get good grades, and get into a good high school. Do well in high school, do extracurriculars, and study for the SATs to get into college. Do well in college, because once you graduate, you will be set in life. If I just stay on this path, my parents' sacrifice will be worth it. My sacrifice will be worth it. The possibility of, quote, moving up in society did not seem impossible to me as long as I do not stray from this path. And so, that is what I did. I got a VSL, got into a decent middle school, auditioned my way into a good high school in the Upper East Side, and enrolled into college. Now, in my final semester, I have landed a postgraduate job with a starting salary that my father didn't make until he had half of my lifetime of work experience. There were obstacles, sure, as any minority women in business may experience, but I never once thought it was impossible. All I had to do was work hard and stick to this path, the Just World Hypothesis. According to the Decision Lab, an applied research and innovation firm specializing in behavioral science, the Just World Hypothesis, quote, refers to our belief that the world is fair, and consequently, that the moral standings of our actions will determine our outcomes, end quote. In my case, I thought that if I worked hard enough, I would be able to achieve social mobility. Conversely, if I failed, it was because I didn't give it my all. Although I was aware that there were headwinds that could hold me back due to parts of my identity that I could not control, ultimately, it was up to me to keep pushing forward, or else it was my fault. Fortunately, I have made great progress in my professional and personal life. It helps a lot to keep the mentality that anything is possible. However, one must also be careful, as a firm belief in a just world hypothesis can be harmful to oneself and others. Outsider's perspective. So how did I come to believe that anything was possible? One phrase, el que quiere, puede. Who wants it, gets it. My mom would say this one phrase from childhood to now, instilling in me the idea that I could accomplish whatever it was I wanted to accomplish as long as I wanted it enough to work hard to get it. She and other adult figures in my life have partaken in asset-based framing, a, quote, narrative model that defines people by their assets and aspirations before noting the challenges and deficit, end quote. ESL, I understand now, was a discriminatory program forcing children to give up their native language by forcing them to learn in a language they didn't understand. Yet at the time, I didn't notice it because a music teacher with an obsession of mango would compliment my attempt at hot cross buns, saying I had what it took to be in an orchestra. 8 years later, I was the first chair clarinet in an honors orchestra during my sophomore year of high school. At my internship, I was fortunate to be assigned to a group whose managers had high expectations for me, trusting me to work on projects that would typically fall under the hands of high-level management. As a result, my work has received visibility and praise from management and company executives, helped me secure a full-time position after graduation. In this case, I benefited from the Pygmalion effect, quote, situations where someone's high expectation improves their behavior and therefore our performance in a given area, end quote. I became more confident in my skills, surpassed expectations, received compliments, and repeat. The Pygmalion effect has allowed me to greatly develop my skills, etched my name in the minds of leadership, and built my social capital, which caused me to, quote, move up and secure an entry-level position. In my case, the biases, comments, and actions of the people around me greatly aided in my ability to come close to achieving social mobility. Yet, it is possible for them to also have the opposite effect. As the Decision Lab puts it, the, quote, Pygmalion effect demonstrates how others' expectations can greatly influence our performance. When someone thinks highly of us, we work hard to maintain that reputation. Inversely, if someone expects us to perform poorly based on our identity, we may actually do worse. End quote. Take the first group activity within a class. For example, when we were told to look at our group members and write down our differences, effectively participating in othering. From the discussion that occurred afterwards, a classmate made the assumption that her male group mate was the strongest. After some follow-up questions, it was revealed that she actively partook in a sport. She may actually be stronger than she thought. The stereotype effect. The just world hypothesis has told the world to think of social mobility as a ladder, one that anyone can climb if they work hard to take the next step up. The problem, however, is that it completely ignores the fact that all of our ladders are not the same. My ladder, you could say, is a wooden ladder with a few loose wood fibers at the handles, giving me a few flinters, but sturdy nonetheless. My cousin, who was neglected as a child and was exposed to marijuana at a young age, has a ladder with steps that sink at every step. And the cousin whose parents own multiple fertile lands passed down for generations was born a couple of steps up their steel ladder. Yet, when discussing the directions of our lives, the cousin on the steel ladder is praised for working hard, while the cousin on the rotten ladder isn't even invited to family functions because he brought misery to himself. Effectively, this cousin is faced with an unstable ladder that actively prevents him from climbing up. Yet his family tells him it is because he is not trying hard enough because of their belief in the just world hypothesis. Constantly being named a failure causes him to perform poorly as per the Pygmalion effect, falling further behind, and the cycle continues. Social mobility is complex. There is no foolproof formula or metaphor that can ensure someone will achieve it. As we have seen and discussed, many factors can contribute to the result, many of which are out of our control. Thank you.
So it obviously takes a great deal of talent to write, reflection to sort of see their lives through new prisms, bravery to write that down, vulnerability to sit in to basically come up today and share it with you. And so I would want to thank Sai and Vanessa again. You can go back to your seats in a second. Before you do so, I was actually at a performance of Mamma Mia and High School Musical 2, not to be confused with High School Musical 1. My daughters were in them, and this seems like a tangent, but after the show, they both, the cast, received a standing ovation. And so it is, if that got a standing ovation as good as those productions do, I hope we can do the same for our two students today. Thank you. Okay, so now we move on to the portion of our program which is discussing what we've been learning. And so, as I mentioned before, one of the key things about the lab is to be fortunate enough to provide grants to people who are doing research that can help the students that we just mentioned. In fact, I'm sure you'll hear themes in their research that comport with the stories that they just told. What we're doing today is a little different. You know, this is not sort of coming in and doing a long talk that gets into a lot of the important details about methodology and research practices and things like that. This is trying to synthesize where they are in their project, to share key findings, to discuss sort of hypotheses that they're exploring, with the hope that the people in this room and the people who see this presentation can say, I wonder if that might be helpful to share with someone. Or could that change a particular practice that I do in my classroom or in my work? Does it change the way in which I want to sort of engage in the issue of social mobility and how I can engage others? And so the format is an experiment. This could fail, okay? We're asking people to do something that they're not sort of comfortable with. So one, that it means that people are giving shorter presentations about their work, okay? Two, we're gonna have to try to be pretty good about time. And then after they're done, they're going to sit here and they're going to potentially have a couple questions for clarification, but then the work is on everyone in the audience. You're going to see at the end of the 3 presentations, there's going to be a QR code, which is a form very similar to the one we shared earlier. And what we're asking is that each of you think about, is there something I just heard that I should share with somebody? Or does this spark an idea or aha that's worth us considering? Okay? And so I'm going to welcome the first group of grantees to come up. They will introduce themselves. They'll talk about their project, and then they will turn it over to the next person. So I want to welcome Jennifer Sloan, Haydeeliz Carrasco, and Dhipinder Walia, who will go in that order. And then I will come in to help facilitate sort of the discussion and the prompts that follow. Sound good? Okay, welcome to the stage.
Hi, good morning, and thank you so much to City College and to the Colin Powell School and to everyone who's been involved in this research that I'm doing. It's really an honor to be part of this group and to take part in the lab meetings that we've been having on a regular basis. I'm an adjunct lecturer in sociology, and to be able to engage in research and have the support to do this is really something that I'm very happy that City College is able to offer to us. So my project really developed out of the teaching that I do here at City College. And the primary question that I get into is, how does the concept of the American dream impact student success? So I want to start off thinking about what and who are the students that we are serving at City College. More broadly, though, we want to think about who are the people in our community who are new Americans. When we think about the immigrant population in the country, we are talking about people who have a very diverse mix of legal statuses within the country. And we also know that things are rapidly changing over the course of weeks, days, et cetera. When we look at who is a foreign-born person in the US, who's an immigrant, it's really telling to look at what the breakdown is among people's status. And this is always surprising, and I often bring this up in classes, and students often are very shocked when I say this. So if we look at the entire population of the foreign-born population in the US, roughly a quarter are undocumented. That's a lot. The people who are undocumented are people who perhaps came in through an authorized way on a visa expired, perhaps people who entered without authorization and never had any sort of legal authorization to be here, among many, many, many other ways. But it's about a quarter of people. And so I bring this up because one of the themes that we've been talking about within the Social Mobility Lab is the role of structures and how those interact with our individual experiences. So within sociology, we have this concept called the sociological imagination. And one of the broad pieces of it is thinking about where do you fit in within the history of the world. And also to think about how your individual experiences are, in effect, impacted by the larger social structures that are there. So if we're looking at this and we're saying a quarter of the people who are foreign-born are unauthorized or undocumented, that's pointing to more of a structural issue than some sort of individual problem with people, paperwork issue that someone might have. And so I think this is really important place for us to start to think about, well, given that we're in a society that is in many ways systematically excluding a quarter of the population from these avenues that traditionally have been used for upward mobility, like go to college, get an internship, get a degree, go to grad school, et cetera, a quarter of people are in many ways shut out from that. And that's where individual institutions and private funding streams come in to support students. But at the same time, we're in a broader context in which systematically people are excluded. Just to think a little bit about the research behind this, two really prominent researchers have kind of looked into this concept of people who are sort of young adults who are undocumented. One is Cecilia Menjivar, who coined the term liminal legality. And it's this idea that folks who are in the United States without authorization, particularly who are kind of on the teenager, young adult side of things, are in a kind of a state of flux, where in many ways they are able to access many of the benefits that US citizens can have, or that people who do have authorization have, in terms of accessing K-12 education. In some places we get access to higher ed funding, et cetera. And so that's a really important question of what is the situation for students like ours, many of whom are in a state of legal liminality. Many people, when thinking about this, many students talk about a sense of belonging in American society, but also recognize that the American dream itself plays a role in shaping their aspirations and what they feel is required for them to achieve that level of mobility. So my research is in the very early stages, and I'm looking at two separate questions predominantly. So one is, how can campuses support students who have precarious legal statuses? So across CUNY, there's roughly 5,000 students who are undocumented. There are consequences for that in their day-to-day experiences on campus. There's many more things that are related to that as well. So how can campuses, how can we as an institution, both here at City College, even down to the department level, how can we support people all the way up through the folks down at 42nd Street at CUNY Central? How are they engaging with recognizing that this is such an important issue? The second question is something that I think our first two speakers really, I can't say it better than they did, but how do CUNY students view social mobility? Do they think that it's possible? What is social mobility to them? Do they consider certain things to be accessible to them? And what is the American dream to them? And how does that differ from the American dream that their parents perhaps set them up with, or that they grew up with through images in the media and so forth? So in order to do this research, I've done some interviews with students at City College to get a sense of what their needs are, both in terms of institutional supports, as well as their understandings of what upward mobility means for them, and also thinking about how that may differ from that of their parents. Another piece of this is looking at institutional data. So CUNY has loads of data on time to degree and educational pathways and trajectories and so on. So that's part of this as well, to recognize what kinds of educational pathways our students are taking. There is a lot of research happening out of Queens College that has looked at this in depth on a broader scale. So I'm kind of curious more on the local level, how can we at City leverage that to improve student outcomes? And also then looking across CUNY campuses. So very briefly getting into kind of what I've found so far. Students have a different idea of what the American dream is compared to their parents. And it's often different also from their peers who are not immigrants, even peers who are second generation, who were born here to immigrant parents. And the ways that this differs is that there's almost like a dual frame of reference, is that there's one way that they are to, quote unquote, supposed to live their lives, which we heard from our previous speakers. Go to college, get a degree, et cetera, et cetera. And that is seen as the way for upward mobility, but at the same time, there's a recognition that there are limitations because of some of these structural issues that are in place. So for them, the American dream might not necessarily mean going and getting a job right out of college. Maybe that American dream means, I'm going to stay in school a little bit longer. I'm going to go get a master's degree because maybe the political situation will change and I'll be able to shift my status, et cetera. And it does differ from their parents' ideas as well, because for parents, particularly the parents of the students that I've spoken with the students, not the parents, there is a really important focus on education, but also work very shortly after graduating. So what is the most important thing here, though, is that there are different sort of cultural narratives that emerge across different students and based on their background, but education remains the kind of the key to upward mobility in all of these narratives. What that education might look like does differ depending on the person's experiences, but education itself is kind of the most important thing and really central to that idea of upward mobility and the American dream. So what do we do with that? Well, we think about ways that we can leverage institutional supports. We think about ways that we can support students who might be feeling that they are excluded from some of these systems that are in place. So thinking about like professional licensing requirements, for instance. How can we support students who might be having difficulty with that? How do we support students on a social level so that they feel that they have a space where they can safely congregate with other students who are experiencing similar things to them? And we do have some good models. So the UC system has done a really good job with this. One kind of future thing that I'm doing is working with some colleagues at some of the UC schools to see how they're working with their immigrant student centers and how their policies are being implemented to support their students. I think that's time. So thank you all for your attention. Thank you again to our student speakers who really said a lot more than I ever could about this topic. And I'll pass it on to our next presenter.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for the Social Mobility Lab for supporting our research and putting this event. My name is Haydeeliz Carrasco. I'm a PhD student in economics at the Graduate Center, and on behalf of our research team, which is also composed by Professor Miles Korak and Professor Luis Monroy Gomez-Franco, I am delighted to present preliminary findings and next steps of our research of how educational mobility is across families in 21st century America. So what is our motivation? Well, what brings us all together here, as we have spoken so far, is that college education is a pathway or a gateway to well-being and social mobility. And the earlier this gateway opens in children's life, the better it is for children's education achievement. However, this gateway is not open the same way to all children, and they don't navigate this gateway through the same circumstances, and that's why we need to understand their family background to understand their differences in their education pathways. So our research wants to leverage on an opportunity in order to make a research contribution. We leverage on a unique national representative panel dataset, which is the Future of Families and Child Wellbeing Study, which is a dataset that represents family structures in 21st century America, and it tracks children since they are born until they are 22 years old. And we're gonna talk more about that in a couple of slides. And to the best of our knowledge, our research could be one of the first to analyze educational mobility of children when they're 22, which means that we will be able to observe if they went to college using the latest Future of Families dataset, which was published just last year. And why is this important? Having panel data is important because we can track children and their families since they're born until they are adult, which means that we can see their education pathways and how they transition from one level to another across their life cycle, and at the same time, how their family circumstances change throughout their life cycle. So our motivation to use longitudinal data is anchored on this hypothesis. Children's college achievement and their education mobility depends on the education attainment that they have accumulated in previous stages of their life cycle, and at the same time, this education attainment is shaped by family circumstances. So there's a lot of research that shows that there are complementarities between the education that children have at different ages, because the skills are formed in a way that what you learn, for example, at early childhood is a complement to what you need at primary school, at secondary school, and then it builds up until college. And that's why we are interested in understanding this in the longitudinal data. And at the same time, we need to understand, to have a comprehensive analysis of child's development, we need to understand how family circumstances change over time. And among family circumstances, we're interested in analyzing family structure, parents' education, and parents' income. So the data set that we are using, as I was saying before, is the Future of Families and Child Wellbeing Study. This is a panel data set that has tracked children and their parents and also their environment, about 5,000 children, since the children are born until they are about 22 years old in the latest wave. And as I was saying before, it is representative of family structures in large urban areas of the United States, and it also has a good coverage of unmarried births. It has over 25,000 variables in the different 7 waves where it tracks families, and it includes several dimensions that we can analyze over time of children and their families. And it includes sociodemographics, health, education, employment and finances, relationships between the parents and their families, neighborhood factors, among many other dimensions. And for example, in the education module, there are specific years in the child's life where we can also analyze school characteristics. At this first stage, which is what we're gonna see today, we're gonna show you the education transition pathways of children in our data set. And also, we're gonna show you some preliminary findings about college attainment by the time children are 22 years old and how that varies across families. So in this diagram, we can see in our data how children's education pathways change over time. And here we look children at 4 different points in their lives. When they are 5 years old, which is when they are eligible for being at pre-K, when they are 9 years old, when they're eligible to be in elementary school, when they are 15 years old, which is when they are eligible to be at high school, and when they are 22 years old, when they are supposed to have some level of college attainment. And what does this tell us? As we can see, most children born in large cities of the United States advance through the education system with some heterogeneities. However, major challenges emerge in the transition between high school and college, and this has also been found in other studies. For example, we see here that by the age 22, 60% of children in our data have attended some college, and by have attended, we mean they are enrolled at the time of the survey, were graduated, or they discontinued college, but they have been in college at some point. However, 40% of children at age 22 have never been enrolled in college at any point after high school. So this is very important for us to understand, what is the population we are studying, at which stage, but also the dynamics in why, for example, some kids are able to go to college, why others don't make the transition. So this is something that we could explore further with the data. When we look at family structures at age 15, about 45% of children were living with both biological parents, and 30% were living with their single mother. And when we look at the data over time across the children's life cycle, these family structures were also the 2 that were more likely to persist over time. When we look at the college achievement at age 22 of the child, here we have how different family structures, what are the degree of college experiences that children have, and we can see that this changes according to children's family background. And here we can see, for example, within each family background, which is each bar, what percentage of children have finished a college degree, which is associate or a bachelor's, what percentage, for example, the green part, is enrolled in college at that point. The yellow part is the ones that were previously enrolled but currently are not enrolled. And the brown part, which is very informative also, those that have never been in college. And for us, it's super important to understand these differences across families. And of course, these differences also reflect differences in parental, for example, education and income. So everything needs to be studied together because all of this shapes children's education pathways. As regards to the next steps of our study, we are interested in studying educational mobility, which is the main goal of our study. And this means comparing what is the level of children's educational achievement compared to the educational achievement that their parents attained. Second of all, as we were saying before, we are interested in studying the role of isolated and also integrated family circumstances, such as the one we were mentioning earlier, such as family structure, parents' education and income. And once we understand both parts, we would like to see if we can design a potential predictive model to understand this relationship. And of course, we would like to see to what extent we can draw some conclusions that could inform education mobility policies. And what we are very excited about is also the role of complementarities across different levels of the education system. As we can see, there could be complementarities between the high school and college education, for instance. And as regard to future extensions, because also the data set is very rich, as we have seen before, it could be very interesting, for example, to exploit the family health variables that are in the data set, a lot of health variables about mental health, physical health that could also play a role in children's upbringing and, of course, their education. And, of course, explore the role of school characteristics that is also in some restricted part of the data that we need to request, and the role of neighborhoods, as previous research in the United States has found. Thank you so much, and looking forward to the next presentations and discussion.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dhipinder Walia. I'm a CUNY Graduate Center student and a lecturer at Lehman College. I'm hoping I'll be a CUNY Graduate Center graduate in the fall. Thanks. So my presentation is going to focus on some findings. My project is about the rhetorical agency of student parents. I thought it would be helpful to just walk you through a very brief story of how I got to student parents. So initially, when I went to the Graduate Center, I was interested in diversity. So I entered the Graduate Center around 2019 when Trump first got elected, and I noticed there were a lot of things being said institutionally about diversity, and I was interested in comparing and contrasting what those narratives of diversity were compared to individuals on the ground. Then COVID happened, and all of a sudden I started following care rhetoric and how higher education, there was a lot of discourse around how we should take care of each other, take care of students, take care of staff, take care of faculty. And again, I was curious about how that compared and contrasted with individual experiences on the ground. And then I became a student parent, I became a mom, and those two things felt like they collided in my student parent identity. So I then realized I wanted to do work on student parents. I wanted to learn more from student parents, specifically how student parents enact their rhetorical agency, how they're using language, communication, actions to transform their experiences. And what I've learned and what I wanted to learn and I ended up learning is how student parents can also be a valuable resource in teaching us about diversity and care. What does it mean to provide meaningful care to individuals on campus? And what does diversity, how does it look like for them? Okay. So these are some of the questions that I came to the project with. So how are student parents actively exercising their agency in higher education? I became really interested, which I'll talk about methodology, in specific practices that student parents were enacting to transform their circumstance. Because again, when I say rhetorical agency, it's just a fancy way of saying what they're doing to change their day-to-day, to create meaning for themselves. And then, of course, I was really interested in how student parents challenge and expand our understanding of higher education, what institutionally we say about diversity in care versus what they define it to mean. Oh, I'm sorry, I was not, wait, okay. So methodology. I spent 2 years interviewing 6 student parents from Bronx Community College. They all had at least one child enrolled in the Bronx Community College Campus Child Care Center. I interviewed them during pickup or drop-off. It was just the best time to sort of have conversations. The student parents were they all identified as females, and they were ages 19 to 30. They were also all part-time students. I didn't intend to interview part-time students. That's just how it happened, which I'll talk later about how that kind of shed light on some of my findings. In terms of just being very straightforward, I chose Bronx Community College, the Campus Child Care Center, because I don't know if folks are familiar, during COVID time, some CUNY child care centers had an agreement where if you were a student of a CUNY campus, you could send your child to any CUNY campus child care center. And so what happened is I sent my kid to Bronx Community College Campus Child Care Center, and there's no, it was just a very easy way to connect with other student parents personally, and so I figured why not sort of engage with this population even further. Okay, so my approach, when I was interviewing these 6 student parents, I just wanted to know more about them. I asked questions like, tell me about why you chose to come to school, tell me about your experiences of being a parent. And I used the grounded theory approach, which basically means I didn't know what I wanted to argue. I just let the sort of interviews take place and see what emerged in the transcripts. And what I saw emerging in the transcripts was a lot of language, like I mentioned, around agencies. So student parents were using language like, I made the decision to do this because, or I chose to do this because, or I'm interpreting this situation in this way because then it changes my day-to-day. And so I started following this language of rhetorical agency. I also then further followed the way student parents were defining college as home, the way they were navigating their feelings about childcare as kin care versus childcare as campus childcare. There's a lot of interesting stuff that I ended up finding out about how student parents frame productivity. I'm thinking about what Miles said earlier about rest. A lot of stuff around rest comes up. And also then just what does it mean for the college to care? Student parents framed care as caring about not just me, but my family as well, my kids as well. So these are 3 findings that I wanted to share with you. The first, all student parents that I interviewed, their decision to go to college was fundamentally connected to expanding or transforming their experience of early motherhood. So for one student parent specifically who, I don't have a clip of her talking, but she is in the full-length documentary that we created. Catherine Reyes, she talks about day 2 post-cesarean section, going to the pharmacy to get a prescription for her newborn, and not having the funds to do so because she had to take a cab to get to the pharmacy. Her disability check didn't come through. And in that moment, she realized, I need to do something because this is just not going to work. She emotionally shared how she felt like day 2 of being a mom and she was already failing. And so, yeah, I think that this is important to recognize because it gets convoluted where college is about just having a better life, but for student parents, it was very specifically about transforming those first 6 months, year of early motherhood. And then the other finding that was super interesting and important for me to share is all student parents were trying to get some rest. They used campus childcare centers, or they used the time their kid was at a campus childcare center to either think about rest or get rest. And I say think about rest because realistically, time after time, a student parent would say, like, yeah, I really wanted to just relax, but I figured why not take the extra hour to do laundry, or why not take the extra hour to work on this assignment? And then there were other student parents who very radically, there's a book by Tricia Hersey, Rest is Resistance. There are student parents who said, I take that time where my kid is cared for and I take a nap, 2, 3, 4-hour nap, and I feel good about it. And I was able to even trace how through taking a nap, they transformed their college experience so that they didn't burn out, which is something that some student parents talked about experiencing when they went to college the first time, if they went to college right after high school, excuse me. And then another finding I wanted to share with you, all student parents worked really, really hard to transform this campus childcare center into a home. They needed it to be a home, otherwise they just didn't feel comfortable having their kid be there for hours at a time. And so how did they make it a home? They engaged in these ordinary practices like lingering in the campus childcare center space, right? Looking around, seeing what's going on, and then checking in with their kids' teachers, with the staff, wanting to know more about the teachers, and they were vocal about how I'm doing this because I want to know who's around my kid, and I want these people to know who I am, because in their minds, that was a way to ensure that their kid would get the best possible care. And what I want to share with you, so like I alluded to earlier, I'm very grateful that this grant was able to support a documentary project which follows 3 student parents. And so what I want to share with you is the last section of this documentary. We asked student parents to write a letter to their child. And I think what comes across in this clip is a little bit of what I'm talking about here, but just much better, of how there's a sense of belongingness that they're able to create through the campus childcare center space. So I will hopefully do this correctly.
To my kids and my little one on the way. While you've been learning about how the world works and who are the ones we can trust, I've been learning too. Every day I walk onto this campus, I've been learning how to be a better mom, a better friend, and a better teacher. So when the time is right and you're ready to face the world, you'll be ready too. I think of who you want to be as an individual, but also who I want you to be. And that is to always be kind to those around you, but especially yourself. We have found a sense of belonging on this campus, with both of us being students and looking up to our teachers to guide us. I can't wait until tomorrow when we are so much more than just students.
Dear Haley and Will, while you have been learning at the Children's Center at Bronx Community College, I have graduated from Bronx Community College. I have been able to continue my studies at Lehman College with BCC still being my support system. Every day I walk onto this campus, I think of all the opportunities and connections we have made here throughout the years. I feel so lucky to be going to school with you because as I am working hard to receive my diploma, I know that you are in great hands. We belong on this campus because it has become part of us. We know the CUNY public safety, we know the professors even after the semester's over, and we build lasting friendships with the staff of Bronx Community College. Right now we are students, but tomorrow we will be whatever we want to be. whatever our passions drive us to be. As long as you are happy and we are happy, I will always be grateful for the major impact this college and Children's Center has had for us. This is the foundation where our dreams began to come true. With love, Mommy.
Dear Liam, I always said I'd go back to school someday. Never did I think that my best friend will be my reason, my drive, and my motivation to make it official. There I was, looking into your beautiful eyes, knowing that I needed to make you proud. That is when I knew. While you've been learning, I've been growing. Not only have I grown intellectually, but I've learned about patience, what a sense of community is. I've learned to trust others, and truly learned the meaning of selflessness. When I saw you light up every time you went into your classroom, I knew I made the right decision. Knowing how close you were gave me a sense of comfort, and knowing that I can drop by and see you gave me a sense of peace. Receiving photos of what you were doing, updates on your progress, and things you've learned has enriched this experience and made it unforgettable. It was important for me that you knew that although I was not there, I was not very far. It was important for me to build a relationship with your teachers, so although I was not physically present, you still felt me there. My sacrifices shouldn't have to be yours, and I make it my mission every day to make sure that you don't feel it. Every day you teach me to be a better mother. You have taught me to be resilient, strong, appreciative, and more importantly, your biggest advocate. We are a team, and a solid one at that. You make walking into this campus fun and gratifying. The way you march onto this campus with a sense of security, happiness, and excitement makes it less hard when I have to leave you. At this point, I'm convinced that you are more okay about it than I am. You are safe, you are happy, and this is why we belong here. Right now, we are students, but tomorrow we will be an accomplished duo. We will be at the finish line standing together and stronger than when we started. I hope one day I can make you as proud as you have already made me. Love, Mommy.
All right, so see you tomorrow.
Tomorrow. On Monday.
No, Monday.
Hi.
Marcy. Yes, but what's your costume? Triceratops, yay! What you mean? Wow, that's for me, thank you.
I just have one more slide quickly to share with you just the opportunities for support that I learned as an instructor. This is very simple, but it's transformed my teaching philosophy. All the student parents talked about how there's a pressure for them to self-disclose that they are student parents, and some of them come to disclose in the beginning of the semester, some of them don't disclose at all, and some of them take a minute. So now on my syllabus, I have a caretaking statement that just simply says, hey, if you are a caretaker and you need any sort of accommodations, please let me know. And in the spirit of anthropologist Bianca Williams, I also use this radical honesty approach where I talk about my own position as a caretaker and how sometimes I might need certain accommodations from students as well in terms of, like, you know, be patient with me if I'm not responding to an email right away. As a parent, I didn't talk about this, but I was really, really surprised at how little resources there are for postpartum parents. Things like lactation rooms, things like I just had a C-section and I need support in getting from point A to point B, right? Stroller parking. These are things that I feel like I've now learned that I want to sort of advocate for, not just at Lehman College where I work, but I think CUNY-wide. As a researcher, the reason why I wanted to do this documentary is I really feel it's important that we archive student-parent experiences, particularly now where funding for campus childcare is not guaranteed, and it's very easy to cut funding when you don't have a rich database of archival material that shows that this kind of service is necessary for student parents. And then as an advisor, part-time student life is real, and it's fantastic, and it should not be overshadowed by things like the Momentum Initiative, which I understand has a great place to advocate for how we can get our degree in 3, 4, 2 years. But all student parents here talked about how this was their middle ground. Part-time studenting was their middle ground so that they could be great students, great parents, and feel great about the work-life balance. So that's my presentation. Thank you so much.
So thank you, all three of you, for tremendous presentations, the work that's been done. It's really great to see. This group was intentionally sort of put together because all of their work is so proximal to the needs of our students. I mean, you'll see that across all of the research, but specifically here where you've got people who are precarious because of their legal status, or we're looking at sort of how different sort of educational gateways are open in terms of how, what happens at the age of 5 can affect whether they go to college or not. And obviously in the last case with childcare and how that was so movingly put forth in those documentary films. So this last section is the only thing that is standing between you and lunch. And so you have to pay for your lunch. And so the way you pay for your lunch is by sharing ideas with us. So you're going to see a QR code that pops up right there. If anyone would prefer to have a handout, we also have paper. And so Daniel will bring those around and hand out a paper for you. And so if you could raise your hand if you want sort of a piece of paper or look at this. And you'll see a couple of prompts here. One is, what new ideas or ahas were sparked by what you heard? And I'm going to give you an example or two as I ask our panelists here for some questions. What hunches, hypotheses, or questions did the research raise in your mind? That could be about some things like you're wondering if something is going on right now, or you wonder if this could be something that would be an interesting thing to look at. And then, perhaps most importantly, what did you hear that you'd want to share with someone? So share with someone would be, you could have heard something where you're like, wow, I know someone who's a parent here and maybe they don't know about the child care resources. Or it could be, look, there's some things that we heard about, earlier in terms of faculty that we want to point in terms of the caretaker in your syllabus. And so these are things that we want to try to aggregate and share back with people. And so it's really important to sort of play a role. This is the only time in a presentation where literally I don't mind where everyone is on their phone. And I'm still going to sort of talk a little bit to our panelists because I think there's some interesting things that have come up over the course of times that they can expound upon while you're sort of typing away. Now, it was alluded to before that this group, this cohort of grantees have been gathering maybe every 3 weeks or so, where they come together to hear each other's research. And that's been, I think, a really sort of wonderful experience where people are able to talk about their work in real time, to get suggestions on their methodology, to discuss hypotheses or hunches. And so one of the things that sort of has come up, and I'll sort of tee this up in terms of things you may be thinking about, is that with the research that Jennifer shared around sort of precarity, one of the things that she shared during the course of that was the form that undocumented students have to fill out in terms of to get financial aid. And given her research, it sort of seemed to us like, wow, is this form actually a deterrent to getting aid? Deterrent. Is it something where it's sort of, there was no language in it that spoke to sort of you're protected, we're not sharing this? It felt like there was a potential for someone to be exposed. Similarly, in Haydeeliz's research, there was an interesting thing in the chart that she had shared that talked about sort of different ways in which single moms and their children, how their education trajectory was moving. And one of the things that was interesting in that was that we saw, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we saw that that students of single parents, single moms, that they at age 15 were actually in a higher grade attainment than students with married parents. And that may seem counterintuitive, but one of the hypotheses might have been is that were they enrolling their students earlier in kindergarten because of the child care need? And again, that's not proven, it's a hypothesis. This is just a way of us sort of sharing some of the stuff that has been come up in our conversations that may be like, I wonder if. And so we have a couple minutes for questions for the three of you, if anyone has questions while you're still sort of typing away. And I will kick us off with one. And we'll do this for a couple of minutes, and then we'll break for lunch. And so one of the questions I just would love to hear is maybe if each of you could sort of comment, actually I'll direct this more, the role of Social Mobility Lab. One of the things I think that was really interesting in terms of the work on parent care, research grants matter. It helps, fund the work that's being done. And everyone is using these funds in a way that is helpful. But I thought it was really interesting in terms of you were able to document it, and then what was the other sort of primary use for your funds?
To pay student parent. Oh, thanks. Hello. To pay student parents for their time. So each student parent who participated received $500, which is, if you're a parent, time is worth way more than $500, but I was so grateful that I was able to provide that, or that the grant was able to provide that.
Okay. And then any other questions out there? Or I'm going to keep going. Yes.
I have a question for you,
Yes.
there is a huge kind of, there's a main topic right now in the college agenda talking about lost boys and the incel community and young, lonely men. There was the podcast released recently called Diary of a CEO, where they had some experts talking about this, and they were citing how some of the statistics out there point that men who grow up in a single mother household are something like 60% less likely to go to college, 60% more likely to end up in prison. Is this something that you are seeing in your research? Is this a question that you're interested in learning more about? Is this, kind of wondering about that? It does seem something that's kind of related to something of what you show, but there was some gender right there.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you for your question. And that also, I would like to respond both to your question and to Bob's comment to talk about family structure and the college achievements. So these are still preliminary findings, but what we find is that when we combine the degree of the percentage of students that by age 22 have college degree plus the ones that are enrolled, two-parent families are the ones that have a higher probability of having a percentage higher. However, all children with different family structures seek education and have some degree of college enrollment and also graduation rate. So it's important to understand why they have different experiences, And also related to your point, we still haven't looked at the gender dynamics, but I think you're bringing out a very important point that we could explore further because single mother households, other data has shown, that typically have higher likelihood of other vulnerabilities as regards to poverty. Although when they have high education, they are able to support their children's education pathway. So it's more about the combination between education and income, although we haven't explored yet the gender lens. But thank you so much for this good question.
Yeah, and that's, by the way, the kind of things we want to sort of oh, wow, I hadn't thought about that. Oh, that's really interesting. And even as you said it, and even as the response, as someone who had grown up with a single mom in poverty and as a male, it is interesting when you also sort of can take this information and apply it to your own life to try to sort of make sense of it, which I think is really important. Yes?
You had a stat 40% of the population that was not enrolled in college. Did you look at, were they enrolled in non-traditional pathways or trade schools? I feel like a lot of times these days we're talking about so much emphasis on universities and college, but there's so many different pathways now. So just curious if you took that into consideration.
Thank you. So far, the variable that we looked is one that asks, have you ever been enrolled in college? And then we looked at the different pathways, but as regards to the ones that attain a degree, that includes all types of degrees, for example, including trade school. So, but we can explore better these other pathways for the ones that were never enrolled in college. Thank you.
It's worth noting, one of our other grantees who couldn't be there today. Paul Ottewell is exploring this question of sort of moderate mobility and different kinds of pathways. And one of the things that he had shared in one of our earlier sessions was this idea of, again, I think I'm stating this correctly, that every credit that you get advances your mobility. Like it's not just like sort of, more education is better. And so there is this sort of notion of to high school, to some college, to whatever, all having some correlation with better sort of mobility outcomes. Any other questions? Yes.
I was just going to say things first for today. I had a specific question to Dr. Walia.
I'm not a doctor yet.
Professor. You are now. So in your research, I know you were looking into New York City when it comes to accessibility in regards to providing social mobility for student mothers, or student parents specifically. New York City is a metro area, and I've noticed that usually in such places there are lots of opportunities when it comes to social mobility, law clinics, and much more. When it comes to more rural areas, what's your viewpoint on how we're progressing forward towards providing access to such areas, especially with the availability of technology such as Zoom and other things that would enable us to create these virtual platforms and world like for people to be able to enhance their social mobility? Thank you.
Thanks for the question. It's a great question. My very cheating answer is my focus was really on CUNY campus childcare. And I didn't mention this, but I'm in English, specifically Comp and Ret. So I really sort of hunkered down in the interviews I did with CUNY and then sort of following CUNY activism to get campus childcare. So it is an interesting question about how it would compare to rural childcare services, but I don't yet know.
Yeah. So two quick things. One, we will share the link to her documentary film if anyone wants to see the entire thing and share it generally. There's also an excellent book that's on the topic called Class by Stephanie Land, who also wrote Maid. And in that book, Class, she chronicles her own experience as a mother trying to get an education. And she was, I think, in rural Montana. And so you see some of the information about that. Okay, has everyone done their homework? Submitted something? Great. We're just a little over, so I'd ask us to grab your lunch, come on back here, talk amongst yourselves about what you heard. It may spur additional ideas. We will start again at 1 o'clock with 2 more rounds of what we just experienced here, so keep the ideas coming and flowing. If I could ask the grantees who will be presenting in the afternoon just to come up to me for 1 second before we you grab your lunch, that would be great. And otherwise, enjoy your lunch. Thanks, everyone. Please, everyone, come back at 1 o'clock. And another hand for everyone here. Thank you. Okay, well, hopefully you all had a good lunch. Now, if you could possibly all put your chips away. I'm just kidding. No, I mean, I'm sure you've all been in that place where you're at a meeting and all of a sudden, it's just package, but I think you're okay. Hope you had a little bit of time to grab some lunch and to chat with each other. And I wanted to kick off the afternoon session and get us going. Before doing that, I just wanted to again sort of thank everyone for being here today. It's really important, the diversity of the people that we have in the room and the different roles they represent. It allows everyone to take something different from today and share it, either with their colleagues or with people even at home or dinner parties about the kind of work that we're doing and the interesting findings that are being shared today and the perspectives so that we can all sort of see each other more fully and the challenges that people face as they look to sort of move up in life. So our next group of grantees is a group of 2. So I'd ask Waleed, Sami, and Kevin Foster to come up, and they will get us kicked off for our first afternoon session. Thank you. You're going forward that one, and then back if you have.
Wonderful. Okay. Perfect. Thank you, everyone, for staying after lunch. That's very nice. I appreciate it. Very difficult to do. Don't worry, it's only 10 minutes, but I'm excited to present some of this work to you all and some of the methodology, some things we're doing in this lab. Thank you all for having me and, of course, funding this research. I'm interested in looking at social mobility amongst Muslim American students within the CUNY system. I'm specifically interested in looking at how family structure, specifically filial piety and religious identity, may play a role in the way that individuals from this community conceptualize their social mobility, their constraints, and their opportunities. I want to start by kind of giving you a little bit about my disciplinary background. I'm a mental health counselor, so I'm a trained therapist, and I'm in the psychology department. So you've been getting wonderful kind of structural understandings of family, family formation, really, really important, right? We're looking at objective data, we're looking at family formation, all these sorts of things. My end of the table is very subjective, right? So we're going from one end of what family could mean to really the psychological determinants. And that's sort of my scope and limitation, right? The way I conceptualize this work is very dyadic. So I'm not trying to necessarily generalize, but really kind of work on providing like a little bit of small theory, a little bit of data, specifically to individuals in counseling, within mental health, within family therapy, specifically work I would do, but also advising, right? Hopefully things you walk away as maybe an individual advisor, a faculty member, someone within the department somewhere where you're having a one-on-one conversation, right? Or at most you're having a conversation with the family unit. In that perspective, one's subjectivity is going to be very important. And so as we see here, your beliefs about family and what kind of determines your beliefs, which can include, of course, religious identity, will play a large role in shaping everything you do, including potential social mobility. So with religious identity in particular, one of the pathways to understand is that it tends to be really good for folks in generating optimism, right? Especially in difficult circumstances, right? So we think about primarily working class community. We'll get a little bit into the demographics of the Muslim American community, but very reflective of the larger CUNY system and folks whom we try to serve as well. So it generates forms of optimism. We have some interesting data from, for example, Catholics and Protestants about how this greater optimism infused and synergized with one's religious identity leads to feelings of optimism, potential resilience, as they kind of encounter this very difficult educational journey that we all have to go on to, right? That research, though, on Muslim American populations is limited, so we're interested to see if those effects kind of transition over or if they're subtly different. And, you know, if you're into the mental health data, you know pretty well, which maybe Dean Foster will kind of talk a little bit about, but there's all sorts of important psychological resources that come from feelings of optimism, right? We know this within risk-taking data, especially related to addiction and these sorts of things. Young people who are very optimistic about their future engage in less risk-taking behavior, right? And that tends to kind of go across different class lines, right? So these sorts of things are, I get a little bit crunchy, a little bit fungible, because we're now into subjective understandings about the world, but in keeping in line with the scope that I'm trying to introduce, which is a dyadic scope, right? Which is how do I sit in front of someone and what buttons can I press here, right? To help you maybe get to the next point. That's sort of the lane that I'm trying to swim in. Quickly, why study Muslim American social mobility? All right, underrepresented community in the larger social science data. I'm sure everyone can understand why, very small population, about 4 million Muslim Americans, right? But there's specific dynamics within the Muslim American community, which are very interesting when it comes to overall conversations about social mobility in this country. So my argument being is, okay, underrepresented in the data, sure, but there could be very unique things that we learn about the idea of social mobility if we just unpack this community for just a few moments. And one of those, for instance, is it's one of the youngest faith groups in the United States. So social mobility, what this community thinks about social mobility, what the youth in this community think about social mobility is going to matter quite a lot, right? They're quite literally very young. Perhaps one of the most astonishing features of sort of the Muslim American population within the United States, despite being extremely small, very racially, ethnically, linguistically heterogeneous, right? If you go to any Muslim community center, you're kind of assaulted by dozens of languages, different ethnic groups, pairings, very heterogeneous, very heterogeneous. It's difficult to generalize based off of this population, but if we go into and we see sort of how our concepts work in a unique way within this population, right, we get to see how ideas such as social mobility and family, specifically filial piety, which I'll define in just a few minutes, impact a very, very diverse group of individuals, right, across language and ethnicity, various acculturation. The Muslim American community is not majority immigrant. It's actually half and half. We have a long tradition of African American Muslims in this country, right? So we're looking across very different dynamics here, and so it's very interesting to unpack that. Primarily working class. It's a faith group that's more likely than other faith groups to report making $30,000 or less. We've normed this a few different times, so primarily working class. There is a large inequality, so segregated on top, there's a few high-performing professionals, right? But overwhelmingly, especially since the year 2000, right, the community is, has a large concentration of individuals who report making $30,000 or less. So social mobility starts to matter a lot, right? Career aspirations, what resources are people bringing to this dynamic? Well, that's really important. And of course, well represented across the CUNY system. I'm gonna kind of skip through this. Yeah. All right, let's just jump to the hypotheses. Really quickly wanted to add, there are about 4 million Muslim Americans in the country, very, very small population, less than 1%, but close to 1 out of 5 of them live around New York City. So just about under 1 million, right? So the CUNY system, New York City, you're gonna learn a whole lot, if you just look into this group a little bit. So very quickly, wanted to look at our hypotheses. Does religious identity shape beliefs about social mobility amongst our students? What role does family structure and support, specifically filial piety, play? Now I'm gonna just back up for a second and define filial piety. Filial piety is a Confucian term, but it's normed in many different cultures. And I'll just take you a step back. Most of us who grew up here probably have an expectation of what our parents would like us to do, right? For some of us, that weighs pretty heavily. Other of us have a lot of room to maybe to diverge from our parents, right? Filial piety is distinguished, right? If it's almost a spiritual or religious term, piety, right? It's distinguished by the level of obedience or the demand that one's family places on you in a more, kind of like a reciprocal way. So it's very much the same. It's family, all of us can relate to family expectations. All of us can relate to your parents or your extended family having a strong opinion about what you should do. That's all fine and that's pretty normative. But what we find in a lot of collectivist cultures is that dial is turned up just a little bit, right? Just a little bit from, I expect you to do this, to actually there's gonna be a bit of a problem if we have a big divergence that happens within the psychology department and within other fields, within social sciences and humanities. We frequently find students of this background and other backgrounds who come from some of those backgrounds which are more collectivist, more filial piety focused, sometimes encountering divergences or differences with their career aspirations. What sort of degree should we get? Am I allowed to go here? I don't know how my parents would agree or disagree about this. So there's a decision-making process within a filial piety framework, right, that tends to significantly impact career and educational choices. And yes, of course, moving on, how can we gain insights to, deepen our understanding? Very quick on methodology, we're collecting several different data pools. We're collecting a quantitative data pool. We're collecting a qualitative data pool. I'll report some results very quickly from some of the preliminary data that we've done in our qualitative work as we're sort of working through pilot testing and norming and all sorts of things. So it's fun to report that, and very quickly. We're of course interested in questions of, say, how gender, especially in our quantitative analysis, may work out, but we're also gonna see how that will work for our qualitative work. Very quickly, so filial piety, not often defined that way by our students. So part of our work is trying to understand that, but when we do ask them about it, quite literally, they're like, oh yeah, that's a big thing. And very quickly, at least in this preliminary data, we're finding that family, especially the obedience towards family, or the family expectations and the level of influence they're supposed to have on your decision-making process, acts as motivation, but expectation setting. Therefore, it's multidimensional, right? It's not as simple as saying obedience towards family is going to help you get a degree or not, right? It depends on what your relationship like with your family is, demands between acculturation, how do we understand our family's values, do they converge, do they conflict? So we tend to see this quite dramatically. So yes, it's playing a role. The folks that we did our preliminary work with are all referencing their family and their religious identity as being kind of informative to the work that they're doing. The other thing I really want to bring up, because I know I'm running out of time, is the idea of value clashes, right? And so this is why I'm interested in seeing how this work kind of spreads to this population. But there appears to be some degree of ambivalence with social mobility, right? What happens if I ascend through the status hierarchies of the society? Am I losing something, right? So some of our respondents mentioned, I'm not sure if I get this job, will I be part of a system that's exploitative? Right? Our students are actually referencing that explicitly, right? There's a degree of ambivalence there, and they're often then referring to what their families and what their faith would tell them to do, how to navigate these situations. We had one student, for instance, oh, that's my time. I'll finish with this real quick. We had one student, for instance, reference, I want to attain social mobility only because it increases my ability to redistribute charity to my family and other people, right? That's the only way I make sense of this system. Otherwise, I feel like I'm part of something, not. So these are very complicated kind of subjective psychological understandings that people are using. And but end here. I know this is a funky little thing that academics like to do, but basically what I'm trying to visualize here is some sort of aligned system that comes from our family systems theory. If we could develop and equip our colleagues within the university system, whether you're a professor, whether you're an advisor, whether you're a student who works in the front office, whether you're a dean, someone who's having these one-on-one conversations, what would it be like to visualize our system as an alliance, right? I know Professor Walia, your work is really aligns with this, as you can see. Like we saw within the student parents, there's an extension of family identity that's happening in the college. My argument with especially filial piety-oriented folks is that I think that needs to happen, continue to happen. Let's use the college as a strength. I have an anecdote about that if anyone wants to get to it. But I'm not telling anyone what to do, right? Just suggesting. But it'd be nice to see something like more clear family partnerships. And I've several times within the psychology department or my own work, I'll have students come with their families and be like, I don't know, can my family talk to you? And this is happening amongst 20, 21, 22-year-olds, but I'm gonna end the presentation there. If you're interested in those anecdotes, I can tell you plenty. So this is already happening, right? This is happening, especially in our departments. It'd be great if we could get our handle on it and see what the data shows us about how to work on these things differently. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for joining us. Thank you. All right. So, I'm Kevin Foster. I'm here and I love this college because of the social mobility that we see in our daily lives working with students every day. This is an amazing institution. I'm doing this work with Sidi Cisse, who's a senior research associate and a current PhD student, and has been an immense part of this project. All right. So we read a lot of studies about college increases economic mobility. Going to college, people make more money, and that's good and important. But we want to also understand some of the other aspects about how income gains are going to relate to mental health, for instance, well-being, social stability, all these other kind of issues. So this project seeks to uncover these broader impacts and inform policies to promote equitable, multidimensional success, both here and nationwide. Now, there's a very strong statistical linkage. Higher education, people with higher education report better mental health We use a variety of different studies. I'll start with the Household Pulse Survey, which is about nearly 850,000 different people answering a variety of questions over the period 2020 to 2024. One of the questions that we'll start with is asking people in the past 2 weeks, how often did you feel down or depressed? 1 means not at all. Up to 4 means pretty much all the time. So higher numbers are worse. This survey also asked about worry. How often were you worried? How often were you anxious? How often did you feel a loss of interest in everything around you? So this is not a model. This is just the basic data. If you just plot this on a graph, well, you do only a little smoothing by age. So age is on the horizontal axis. This is how old people are. And this is how often they report, or how likely they are to report that they felt down or depressed. And probably the first thing that pops out is, okay, it gets better as you get older. There are good things to getting older, which is, for those of us along that path, that's good to know. The other thing here, so this splits into whether people have just a high school degree, some college, including an associate's degree, or whether they're a 4-year college graduate. And we can see the 4-year college graduates, over in around 20, they're almost indistinguishable, but they're quickly, dramatically distinguish in reporting their own mental health. How often they feel down or depressed. It is significantly better to get a college degree. If you ask people, this is worried, how often do you feel worried in the past 2 weeks? Again, pretty much the same information. Gets better as you get older, but it's also better to have a college degree. Anxious, there's actually less of a split here, and at least between, the colors aren't wonderful in terms of the key, but actually folks with some college are a little more anxious than people with a high school degree. But then a 4-year degree is significantly less anxious. So anxiety is a little bit different. And then, okay, loss of interest. Again, this is one of the strongest or widest disparities. Now, we're asking about social mobility. To what extent is this income or is this education? And yeah, this graph is kind of out of hand, but hopefully you can tell from the colors. Basically, the colors get lighter as you go down, and sort of unsurprisingly, income really helps people's mental health. And then this is there are different waves of this Household Pulse Survey over these 4 years, and so we can see how people relate to things going on in the news. Gosh, was 2020, was there something going on? Making people much more likely to report being depressed, and the others kind of correlate in pretty much the same way. With also a strong shift after about 2023, as people on, no matter their educational qualification, reported they were feeling better pretty consistently. So obviously this is a circular relationship. Better mental health can lead people to get a better job with them making higher wages, and better job, higher wages leads people to have better mental health. Again, for a whole bunch of different reasons, including being able to have insurance, get treatment, and that circularity is also just as strongly with education. And so we're going to be looking for sort of natural experiments to try to figure out if we can see. And so my colleague suggested we have this medical expenditure panel survey, the MEPS data, which tracks individuals. It's a panel data set. You know, Haydeeliz had talked about her panel data set where it's extremely valuable to be able to look at the same people. The household pulse is a repeated cross-section, so you're not following the same people over time. The MEPS, on the other hand, allows us to follow the same people over time. And so we're going to look at a couple natural experiments of the Affordable Care Act rollout in 2010 and the 2014 Medicare expansion. Do you want, is this a good place to turn over? Do you want to talk about these? All right, well, you can tell we prepped it in early on about how we're going to do the handoff. So this is a bit of the time series of the different levels. Now this is looking at mental health by this K6 sum, which just basically adds up people's responses to 6 different questions about down, anxious, worried, I don't remember all the others. And so these are, we can see again, there's a pretty strong split between people without college education, had worse scores on all of these, but there's also significant improvements after 2010 rollout of ACA, and then after the 2014 Medicaid expansion. So we do some regression specifications of this difference in difference. So yeah, looking at how much controlling for a whole bunch of other factors, age, gender, race, ethnicity, Hispanic, marital status, US born, income, and college degree, and try to figure out to what extent did these implementations make a difference in the gap. And you know, the difference in difference college times post, if you can see that there, that line of figures indicates that actually the difference was shrinking from both of these impacts here, both of these rollouts. And so we do one other related model. This uses some propensity score matching, which is, again, just kind of another way of trying to hold constant this list of other factors and impacts. And yeah, bottom line, kind of it's the same result. So that's the good news. I will, since the time is approaching, I will. So, you know, there's a lot of other research on social mobility and mental health. Depending on how I summarize this, this can be one of the more obvious pieces of research, that it's better to be born wealthy than to rise up and become wealthy. But it's better to rise up and become wealthy than to stay poor. So, you know, that's, it certainly suggests that what we're looking at here is a part of the impact. And yeah, this is the takeaway. The noted philosopher seems to be contradicted here in this case.
Okay, here we are again at this time of the presentation. I would love to promise you that if you do the homework assignment this time, there is an ice cream bar outside, but that is factually not true. So this is just doing it out of the goodness of your heart and the desire for us to help, you know, with this. So again, we have an opportunity as you sort of do this and add some ideas to ask some questions from our panelists, and I can sort of get us going a little bit. And so maybe I'll start with Waleed. You know, it was interesting, sort of this notion of you know, filial piety, because actually we heard that in the student essay that was read earlier, right? And this sort of the reality of that experience and the pressure. And actually, I probably saw that in a handful of essays from my students. And it was affecting not only sort of the role of education specifically, but also what you were allowed to do in terms of your occupation, or what your pressure was, and where that was, you know. And I'm wondering if you could speak to a little bit about, either what you're hearing from, like how, you said you have some anecdotes about how it manifests itself. And so I'm wondering if you could sort of share a little bit about what that looks like.
Is this on? Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And indeed, the student essay was so evocative for this research, and it's a very consistent experience that I think if you talk to different professors or myself when I was, practicing family therapy, I mean, this is like 90% of what we're working with a lot of different communities that aren't identified as Muslim or from a certain, immigrant background, which would have more filial piety. I do have one anecdote, which is kind of funny. It's a nice anecdote. But I had one student, she's since graduated. She was doing research with me, some research credits as an undergrad, and we were able to get some of her work into a conference, right? Really important for her to go to a conference. She had aspirations about going to graduate school, potentially getting a doctorate. So with me, we're kind of having these first discussions. And wouldn't it be so interesting? She applied to the conference, and then right before my psychology departmental meeting, like 5 minutes before, she burst into my office, and she says, sorry, my parents are on the phone. Can you explain to them what a conference is? I was like, okay, like, here we go. So we put our family on speakerphone, and I'm like, hey, mom and dad, how are you doing? And then, 15 minutes of pleasantries, and yeah, everything's fine. Thank you for asking about my family, that kind of thing. And then they finally get to, so what's going on with the, I really want our daughter to be successful. What is this conference? Is she going to be safe? Is she going to? So pretty much for like 20 minutes, I told them the value of doing this sort of thing, and they were completely fine with it. Now, if we unpack that as a researcher, we see how much me as a professor was a very important cultural agent in that interaction, kind of making everything make sense for both sides. And you notice how the student in this particular case had to run to me and say, hey, you can talk to my parents and help smooth this over in a certain way. And the parents, they just don't know. They want to do what's best for their kid. But they, how do we navigate this? What's going to happen, right? And so that was I can't tell you how many interactions I've had with that. And I'm sure other faculty at this school have had those sorts of interactions themselves. And that was a very, I think that was a very dramatic manifestation of this sort of research. Things that we're doing privately like that, what if we use that as an asset, right? What if we looked at this as an explicit alliance that could be formed between the institution? I'm using alliance because that's what we use in family therapy, between the therapist and the family as a system. But what if the CUNY system itself visualizes itself as an extended family identity? And it seems to play a role a lot with our students who kind of need that in order to support whatever aspirations they have.
Yeah, it's interesting, even as you mentioned sort of back to school night, like as seeing my children sort of grow up over the course of time, it's almost as if on one hand you're encouraged to be less involved in their education, especially when they go to college, although there is obviously some people with helicopter and all that kind of stuff, but how important it is for certain groups for that to continue. I'll turn it over to any questions here. In the meantime, I'll ask a follow-up to Kevin. This is a pure hypothesis, right? And so on one hand, the research points to currently in time sort of better mental health with more education, right? Which of course is not to say that people who have more education don't have mental health challenges. And I'm wondering if how do you capture in real time or in the future as we begin to see, like you see the work about the anxious generation and sort of like the way in which I think even, children of well-off parents are actually now an at-risk population because of other kinds of pressures and sort of are also now over-indexing for mental health. And I'm wondering if you have any sort of thoughts about, as we move forward with this, with information like that, how do we share sort of like the reality of the present situation, but also think about what it means generationally with all the other influences happening, if that makes sense?
The short answer is the current data, the household pulse survey, is a relatively short time frame.
Yeah.
So we don't have that. I think the medical expenditure panel has a longer. Can you see that?
It's possible to actually it has a lot of data, more than 230 variables, the MEPS data. I think it's something that could be branched off, maybe added, but what we did technically was to follow individuals, like, and see how the two groups actually like differ.
As you're continuing to sort of share your ideas via the QR code, any questions that you have for our two panelists? Yes.
Into the pathways, like what is causing this, creating this relationship between higher education and better mental health? Is it having a better community, better resources that could lead to better mental health, or having health insurance, for example? So it would be nice to see.
Yes, we have some thoughts about how to get some identification of those. I mean, some of the specific channels are more difficult. That the ones you mentioned, they're all probably relevant, but yeah, it's tough to try to distinguish. Some we have better telemetry about, and others worse. But we make little steps.
Any other questions? Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. And we'll now... So now I'd like to welcome our last set of grantees up. That was very gingerly, Prabal and Emanuel. And I will turn it over to Emanuel.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Emanuel. I'm a PhD candidate in economics at the Graduate Center. And I'm here today to present a project that explores the significant role CUNY plays in fostering upward mobility in the New York metropolitan area, and especially for low-income students in New York City. The college mobility rate, which ranks colleges by how well low-income students achieve absolute upward mobility, places CUNY colleges among the highest in the nation. This demonstrates CUNY's crucial contribution to driving economic mobility in the New York metro area and highlights the potential of public colleges in reducing family and neighborhood disadvantage. However, while CUNY's success in promoting upward mobility is evident, the specific factors driving this success are not yet fully understood. My project aims to uncover these key drivers and ultimately inform policies that can promote equitable access to college education and upward mobility nationwide. This project examines the factors behind CUNY's success by building and analyzing a rich data set, drawing on student-level data from the university register, matched with post-secondary and post-graduation outcomes. I'm guiding this study with three main hypotheses. The first one, the so-called streetlight effect, suggesting that colleges might primarily enroll low-income students who already possessed high earning potential. This was highlighted by previous research by Professor Hawksby and Avery and Opportunity Insight project led by Chetty. The second hypothesis, the college value added, posits that college experience itself contributed to the outcome of low-income students beyond what they might have achieved otherwise. This is also supported by long-standing research. And finally, the third hypothesis, the economic connectedness, proposes that colleges provide low-income students with exposure to cross-class connections. These connections can then lead to access to new social circles, job referrals, cultural exposure, and improved career opportunities. How I am investigating this? My research utilizes integrated student-level data from approximately 700,000 students who graduated between 2004 and 2014 in all CUNY colleges. This rich data set includes the college records and information on the post-secondary and post-graduation outcomes. Furthermore, students' records are linked to geographic units representing residential neighborhoods, and socioeconomic data for these neighborhoods are also incorporated into the analysis. The methodology involves several key steps. First, predicted earning potential is calculated based on students' pre-college characteristics, such as CAT scores, GPA, socioeconomic status, and parental education. Next, this predicted potential is compared with their actual post-graduation median wages, analyzed by college, degree, and demographics. And finally, I conducted spatial analysis to understand how the neighborhood context influences colleges' attendance and outcomes over time. A key aspect of this is to leverage the heterogeneity in students' residential neighborhoods to study the impact of local economic and social environments on upward mobility. This refers to complementarity in human capital accumulation and graduating from college that was mentioned in previous presentations. Some initial findings reveal that several important trends. First of all, CUNY colleges primarily serve students from nearby NYC communities, reflecting the city's existing racial and economic residence patterns. And based on this residential heterogeneity, I am exploiting differences in student neighborhoods to study how local economic and social environments impact upward mobility outcomes among CUNY students. In other words, spatial opportunity structures suggested by this map showing that the student access to higher education opportunities and potential post-graduation success may vary substantially depending on where they lived prior to attending CUNY. This is because students largely remain in the NYC metro area during college rather than moving to another state, for example, and the stability of the residential location strengthens the ability of this type of analysis to attribute effect to neighborhood characteristics at college entry. Moving on, a second group of preliminary findings, I'm observing significant increases in median wages 10 years after graduation across all demographic groups, highlighting the long-term economic benefits of a CUNY graduation or CUNY education. However, it is crucial to note that gender and racial wage gaps tend to widen over time, suggesting potential disparities in how graduates enter the labor market or the presence of systemic inequities. Furthermore, higher value-added earnings appear to be linked to strong graduation rates and career-focused curricula that align with high-demand fields in the New York City area. The research points that I would like to bring to this conversation try to sit on some key areas for future focus. First, to expand access, we should prioritize addressing systemic barriers in K-12 education and housing, alongside offering targeted aid and outreach to local communities, rather than solely focusing on recruiting from farther away. We should also explore ways to foster close-class engagement within CUNY through programs like peer mentorships or co-curricular activities. And finally, maintaining a strong emphasis on completion rates and the quality of education is crucial for maximizing CUNY's long-term impact. In conclusion, the data is indicating that CUNY's vital role in driving upward mobility in New York City will help us to deeper understand and continue to address systematic inequities, promoting valuable connections and focus on education quality. We can further strengthen CUNY impact and effort efforts to advance equitable access nationwide. Thank you for your time.
All right, good afternoon. I'm Prabal. I'm the one standing between you and that iced coffee that you're planning to have later on. I'm also the last one, so I would like to say that they saved the best for the last, but the fact is, we have already seen like a phenomenal crop of research, at least like promising research already. And the good news is some of the things we are trying to do have already been touched upon so far. So I'll try to be quick. So first, I want to acknowledge my co-authors and collaborators on this project, Professor Bob Millara, Adriana Espinoza, Kai Gilchrist, and Megan Finces. Also not on this list, Hannah, who has been our phenomenal research assistant. She has done most of the work, including the IRB application. So I'm very grateful to them and also grateful to Bob and his team for organizing this. This is, as someone who has tried to organize these things, this is not easy. And of course, Andy to jumpstart all this. Okay, so some key facts. I'm going to touch upon this in a moment, but so far, particularly I as an economist, we focus on mobility. When we talk about mobility, we usually talk about, or social mobility, we usually talk about income or wealth mobility. So in simple terms, whether you are better off in terms of income and wealth compared to your parents. Okay? And if you just look at the numbers, you'll see that the probability that you'll be better off in terms of your income than your parents or previous generation was much higher 80 years ago than it is now. Okay? One way to think about this is, well, this is not necessarily a bad thing if we have reached the point that, everyone is well off and there is no limit to cross, so we are all very happy and satisfied now. That's not true, because as we all know that our society, particularly American society, is also characterized by deep level of income inequality and wage inequality. So it is not the case absolutely that we have reached that kind of equality. And also compared to global American, we heard about American dream. It, no offense, but no one talks about like British dream. So American dream is a very unique thing in the US, in the world. So when that kind of probability goes down compared to other countries, there is some cause for concern. So this is the sort of the background, and as you may have noticed, I'm the only economist in the group, and my colleagues are all psychologists by training. So this was meant to be a very interdisciplinary research. And the core of the research was actually what is it even meant by mobility. So as I said, like for economists, the answer is actually very simple. We just measure income. As much as income is hard to measure, something still sort of a metric that is measurable, so we measure income, and then we sort of generate our scorecard in terms of the winner and loser in terms of income. But then there are other related things that came to mind, and I'm going to get into that in the next slide. But one other thing that came, that was like the common thread among all of us was education. We're in a higher education society, and I'm not going to show that data, but you can trust me that if you look at various indicators, we have already seen mental health, we can see amount of proportion of people who have health insurance. They're all very highly correlated with education and also highly correlated with income. So we came to conclusion that, education and income are very, very correlated, codependent with each other. And no matter how we want to define social mobility, education, particularly higher education, is going to play an important role. So this was kind of our starting point. And the second starting point was also something that has been mentioned over the course of the day, is the CUNY factor. Okay, so we were all obviously very proud of the fact that CUNY features in top rankings in terms of social mobility, even though they are mostly defined in terms of narrow definition. But still, and I think Vince, President Boudreau mentioned that in his speech briefly, that we still kind of struggle with what the secret sauce is, or what is it that we are maybe doing differently, and most importantly, can we identify things that we can do better? So this is another factor that kind of set the background for us for this research. Bob and I did a survey like 12 years ago, and when we eventually able to publish that paper, we saw that in that research, some of the things, for instance, the fact that CUNY City College is a racial majority campus probably helped students in terms of their mental health and stress, and also in terms of like graduation rate and other indicators. Am I wrong? No, I think, okay, all right. So our research questions focus on two broad categories, one institutional factors and one individual factors. And we can, so one, I wouldn't say unique, but I think useful nature of this research is this is something that we did in our previous study 10 years ago also. We combine administrative data with survey data. And there are a couple of advantages of doing that. One, it shortens the survey. No one wants to take a long survey, so we could be parsimonious in terms of questions we ask. Secondly, some of the things like GPA, there's well-known bias in terms of self-reported GPA, so those things we could just collect from administrative data. Administrative data also has the advantage of being able to track students over time, so hence the longitudinal nature of the study. So basically we had to make this choice, like which variables will collect from administrative source and which variables will collect from surveys. So now that we are at a stage, we are still collecting data through our survey. In that survey, we focus on various things, including students' mental health status, because as we all know, I mean, the country is, particularly after the pandemic, has been going through a mental health crisis, particularly among young adults and young population. So we stress a lot on students' mental health and stress reporting. Unfortunately, as Kevin's paper shows, that there is only limited amount of information can be found from national surveys. So we could actually go, and since 4 of the members are psychologists, so we could actually go into more details and more like authentic instruments in terms of mental health outcomes. On the left, you can see like, very garden variety variables that we collect. Basically the idea is to combine demographic, academic, mental health, and mobility data. The last point I'm going to come to the next slide. To create this overall data set where at one point in time we can take some correlations and associations between, say, mental health and GPA, mental health about perception of social mobility or aspirations. And then over time, we can track these students and their outcomes to correlate with what they reported back in 2025. So to give you an example, how we are trying to collect our data. So this appears in the survey. Okay, so this is, to me, this is equivalent of I'm a health economist, and I use a lot of health surveys, so there is usually a general health question, which is very open-ended, which just asks on a scale of 1 to 5, how is your health, like from poor to excellent. So this is like an overall social mobility question, that how students perceive the ladder and where they are in the ladder or where they want to be on that ladder in the future. The question is not here. The question literally asks, okay, imagine all this, and then imagine your community, comparable community, and where you are on that ladder. So this is sort of, when we see election results, it's reported 12% reporting. So this is like 15% reporting. It's an online, ongoing survey, so we have only limited amount of data so far. So the preliminary evidence shows that higher GPAs may be linked to higher social mobility or perception of mobility. No surprise, lower anxiety and depression may also be associated with higher social mobility. And financial support, like financial aid, is also correlated positively with mobility. So in the future, we want to get a better perspective on how students view mobility. To give you an example how this is more complicated than we initially think, so Chetty's work focuses on, and many other work, focus on geographic mobility. So famously, his early work shows how your future outcomes may be dependent on where you are born, the zip code you are born. So if you extend that logic, you might think that, okay, if someone moves from a lower income neighborhood to like the Upper East Side, that would be a notion of mobility. But we know from our lived experiences, from discussion of our students, and I think Waleed's talk mentioned that some students don't think that way. They want to stay back in their neighborhood to give back, to be more charitable, to uplift others in the community. But by that initial definition, that may be not mobile if they just stay back in their low-income neighborhood, but that's definitely not true, or at least the students may not see it as a notion of upward social mobility. So this is, so we are trying to get a better sense of what our students feel, and I think that they may be representing a broader class of students also, because in the US, we focus on like Ivy Plus and all this discussion, but majority of the students are like our students. So finally, the way forward in terms of policy implications, we are going, this is also something that was mentioned during a couple of talks. So the goal also is to sort of learn from our surveys. This is, we will probably able to publish, but part of it is also self-learning as an institution and as educators, like Bob and I are chairs, so as administrators, how we can help students better. If we can understand what our students' aspirations are, we should be able to help them better. So that is also kind of in our future goals. I think that's it. Yeah.
Okay, so now we are one last time. We will be checking your phones when you leave to make sure you've submitted at least 30 responses. Just kidding. But I do want you to take the chance to scan this again. Any ideas or ahas that were sparked by what you heard, hunches, hypotheses, or even questions. And finally, what did you hear that you'd want to share with someone? Now, if you've seen throughout the sort of the day, we've had some similarities in how we've grouped the grantees. In this case, both of these were sort of tackling sort of the $100,000 question we've been asking here for a long time, which is that we do, as a system, really well in terms of promoting social mobility. But the exact reason has always been sort of a little elusive. There's theories, there's some pieces of research, and kudos for these researchers who are really trying to sort of do that in a way that can help us not only figure out the secret sauce, but make sure that we're sort of getting that, I guess to kill that metaphor, on the plates of everyone. Again, there's an opportunity for you to share your ideas and also ask questions of both Prabal and Emanuel. I also wanted to sort of point out, going back to the question of sleep that we were talking about, Emanuel's a recent new father, and so if he's nodding off here, he's okay, because I remember those days. Okay, so I'll start off with a question. If anyone has one, I ask you to sort of jump in. I'm wondering, sort of, as we think about sort of the question about what is contributing to social mobility at CUNY, as well as the way in which people outside the university have sort of had theories about maybe consistencies or inconsistencies in terms of what you're sort of seeing there, if that makes sense. A lot of people are suggesting, like, we are doing well, and they put a theory out there, and then it's a question of whether that holds true or not, and they don't have the advantage of being proximate to that and to also have some of the sources that we have.
I mean, I can only speculate at this point. I think one would definitely be, we still have much lower, even institution is much lower than many other public universities around the country. Definitely UC system or Michigan. So I think that makes quite a big of difference, because even at like, $12,000 or $15,000 a year, $50,000 is a lot of money for many families. So I think that affordability is definitely like a simple answer. Also, I think we are lucky to tap into the huge potential of New York City public school system, which many other places are probably not that lucky. So I have two daughters in the public school system, and as much as I have seen the inequality and also segregation, all sorts of problems. But despite that, it's amazing to see how much talent New York City public schools have because of, the nature of New York City, like people from not all over the world, but also all over the country, they come to New York City for various reasons. So we have this amazing diverse pool of students also who are sort of hungry to succeed. And I think that's kind of, in my anecdotal experience, this hunger to succeed is really sort of often compensates their lack of training, or even if their public school hasn't been that successful in educating them formally, or home problems that we heard from a student. But hunger to success has been constant. And for students whom we have, at least I have pushed, and they have kind of pushed back towards the end of the semester, and they have done well. And one last thing, as an economist, we have a efficient market hypothesis, which is for financial market, but my version of efficient market hypothesis is, again, anecdotally, all my students who have done well in my classes and other courses have all done well career-wise. So my efficient hypothesis, market hypothesis, is that job market is, even before the wave of DEI and all, job market was efficient to identify talented, hungry students. So there is that too.
Great. Emanuel, do you have anything to add in terms of, because I thought interestingly when you had shared your research previously, a lot of attention had been given to the street light or street lamp effect, right?
Yes,
Which
that's
is
correct.
this idea of being able to sort of say, there's always going to be high achieving people, and so we'll just sort of pull them out. But we're a little bit more egalitarian in New York City, and so I wonder if that's something that you think still holds true, or whether there's other things you have identified in terms of the geographic factor and the support, like Prabal was just sort of referring to.
Yes, thank you for the question. That's essentially one of my motivations after reading the book of Paul Tough, The Inequality Machine, where he explains clearly all these hypotheses. New York City, I don't need to say it twice, but it's a very particular dense metropolitan area. So there's place, of course, for these 25 CUNY colleges to attract high achievers from low-income backgrounds, either from the type of households that Prabal described, or just for the surroundings of the metropolitan area. And there's also a peculiarity in the CUNY student body. We are here analyzing data from people who graduate in their 30s, sometimes in their 40s. They came in, came out, they stay away from college for some years, they got back. And all of that is reflected in some sort of neighborhood effect that make them able to commute easily to a CUNY college or not, etc. So I'm figuring out that. And also there's a lot of neighborhood change since the 1990s.
Yeah.
I call it this generation, the first generation of globalization, because their parents went into, during the 1980s or 1990s where they grew up, their parents lost their jobs or, they were the first cash transfer, massive cash transfer recipients, etc., etc. So there are many important dynamics in the city that do not replicate across the country. And one of that is, although we hear that people move around the country, for this particular generation, for the children in the 1980s big cohorts, for example, 1990s, migration rates, internal migration rates, and all over the country are much slower than for previous generations.
Okay. Any questions with the group? Yes.
Thank you so much for your presentations today, and congratulations, Emanuel, as well. For your research in particular, will you be looking at the types of jobs that people get, or in terms of, you mentioned there's high demand in certain professions. Does that make a difference, right? Like if you are able to go into STEM or, let's say, financial services, or just some space where we know that people are going to earn more, are you looking at that and sort of its impact as well on community?
No yet, because that will be the second batch of data I will gather. But all the results I commented on are outcomes, employment outcomes from CUNY graduates who got a job in the New York metro area. So that's sort of explaining part of your question. Thank you.
Any other? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So we have a companion project, so where we will look at, administer our survey to alumni. So it got our IRB approval like 3 weeks ago, so we haven't started. But that's something we have in mind, that so currently employed alum and going back there to their city college experience and city college grades, which we could get from administrative data. So that's on our plate also.
Any other questions? Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. So I know a lot of the research is focused on how CUNY fosters upward mobility, but are you looking specifically into the different campuses and which ones might have more success than others and what factors those might be?
This is probably,
yes.
We are only focused on city college.
Okay, yes. I'm taking all the CUNY colleges, yes. I will say that 10 of them are at the top of this college mobility rate.
Any other questions? I had one quick follow-up I wanted to ask. What's interesting about sort of being able to have the privilege of listening to all this research in real time is the opportunity that continues to sort of like get things sort of flowing in your mind. And something, Prabal, that you had shared that I hadn't thought of before, and I had a question, which was, on one hand, correlation of GPA to mobility seems like it makes sense, right? And I know that you're looking within City College, but I was thinking about that in the context of grade inflation, which we know happens in different universities. And I don't know if there's anything that looks at sort of the extent to which there's variability in grades given out at City College versus other universities. I won't mention any by name, but there have been reports where I think 80 or 85% of all grades given out at certain universities are A's. And so one is the idea of a GPA as a true testament and reflection of talent versus something that may be affected by the type of institution you get and the way in which they sort of think about their grading policies.
I agree. I can tell you from my experience as chair for a little more than 2 years that we don't have grade inflation. In fact, we have a much bigger, what we call a DFW problem, which is like grade D, F, and W as withdrawn. So I have struggled with this question because when our students go, again, going back to sort of the efficient market, because our students have to go to job market and compete with these students from these institutions, it creates like an uneven playing field for them if they not only come from a more branded, well-branded university, but also with like high grades, whereas ours don't. Again, from like anecdotal evidence, I know that our students, I mean, just a small anecdote, but I think a very useful anecdote. So I collaborate with a couple of oncologists at Memorial Sloan Kettering. So as you know, I mean, they are some of the best in the world. So one of my collaborators was telling me how he had like 4 RAs, and one of them from, I don't think he mentioned which specific CUNY college, because, you know, outside of CUNY, they're all CUNY. There are not many people actually can distinguish successfully. Could be City College, because City College has a partnership with Memorial. So he mentioned how, like all other sort of like Ivy League RAs, they expect it to be sort of spoon-fed and like given more detailed instruction what they need to do, whereas the CUNY student was more proactive and sort of learned on his own, and then eventually became like a better RA, better help than other students. I don't know whether grades reflect that.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean, on the one hand, I can tell you that my colleagues are way more concerned about not having a grade inflation. Like they do not want to give, I just had this conversation with some in the room in the morning, that on the one hand, we know that some of our students have like very difficult personal circumstances, in terms of both like family and work, but on the other hand, we do not want to dilute our sort of grade or degree, or there is only like limit to the compassion we can show. So in other words, we try to show our compassion in other ways and not by giving like an easy grade.
Yeah. It's just an interesting sort of conundrum, right? Yeah. Okay, I think, thank you very much, and we'll move on to sort of closing remarks. A big hand for our last sort of group of panelists. So before turning it over to Andy with some closing remarks, and we will, assuming he's on time, but I wanted to sort of recap a little bit about what you heard today. And so the first thing I want to, again, give a big round of applause to all of our grantees who presented today. It's really I mean, the work is so diverse in so many different ways. And if we sort of think about what we just heard today, both in terms of methodology, everything following the same students for 2 years, a group of 6, to looking at data sets that were in the hundreds of thousands. We branched across different fields. Also, the experience of the researchers was everything from department chairs to PhD candidates. I mean, there's a diversity in the people and the voices we're bringing into this conversation. They reflect the needs of our students and the communities they represent. So if you think back at all of the different factors and all of the groups that were represented, everything from child parents to issues around filial piety and Muslim Americans, and looking at issues of fragile families based on their status, and I'm sure I'm leaving so many more out, but I mean, we are really looking at a diversity of needs and students that don't often get the kind of attention that perhaps they should, and they're doing it because they reflect the students that are coming here, and also a lot of students who we need to understand how to help them move up that ladder, and also what does moving up even mean? And so also moving towards different definitions of social mobility that go beyond the economics. I'm so thrilled and honored to sort of like, have them here today to share that knowledge in real time. It's also worth noting, and I probably should have done it before, they're at various stages of their research, right? And so they are showing stuff in real time and giving you a look under the hood, which again probably provides some degree of vulnerability in terms of sharing here's where we are, which is also great and should be commended. As I mentioned before, we are about to welcome our next cohort of grantees, which we're excited about, and they equally are asking questions that are of interest and importance. So questions ranging from, again, that definition of American dream and social mobility. One grantee focusing on what does it mean in terms of meaningful work, not just the economics of how much you may make, but also what it feels about doing that work. We've got people who are looking at what does it mean to have a parent who maybe had an education but maybe didn't reach what that education should have provided to them, and what that means for their support of public education for their children or higher education. We're looking at issues that are addressing the role of career services and how that can promote upward mobility. And I'm only sort of talking about a few that come top of mind. And there's also two other researchers from this first grantee that we'll hear, for this first cohort that we'll hear about later, who are also doing important work. And so we're so excited about the work that we've done to date and the work that will be moving forward. As I mentioned before, in the fall, we'll be doing this Ideas for Moving Up campaign, promoting existing research out to the communities. We're excited about that. The group of the new cohort, and hopefully with the old cohort, we will continue to get together to hear research in real time. So we're trying to build a community, and we're excited that you're all part of it, which is why we've got people from career services and students and alumni and all facets of the university represented in this event today. And one of the reasons why I think this work is all special and sort of tying it over to Andy is that, yeah, people are out here, they're doing research, they're teaching classes, but I think hopefully you felt their commitment to why they're doing it. You know, there are normal incentives within academia to publish papers and do this, and obviously that's something that's important. We want to hope that their work sees its place in those outlets. But I think the reason why people are doing this work here and have been doing this work for such a long time is the commitment to the students that they see and they meet every day. The care and the compassion that they bring to this work is commendable, and the importance that it has in changing lives is extraordinary. They probably would be doing all of that work independently, but I think it's also probably a reflection of the leadership we've had from Andy for however long he's been sort of doing this, and my experience with him for the last year plus in getting this lab up. I mean, he cares, and you see that. You see that in not only his support for the lab and the work that we're doing and how we are putting this work forth, but also in the fact that he's meeting with students individually in terms of giving out needs scholarships, that he is caring about what their lives are like now and what their futures are. It's been a real honor to work with him and a privilege. I'm excited that he's able to sort of put a bow on this event. There are so many things that he will leave behind in terms of his legacy. This is but one, but they're probably all bound by the care and compassion that he has for higher education in general and its role in promoting social mobility. So I'll turn it over to Andy to bring us home.
Well, thank you, Bob. And, I generally, when given the opportunity to either open an event or close an event, always choose to open an event. Because closing an event, and Bob just did this for me, means there's nothing left to say. And Bob's summary of what we've just experienced, I thought was about as good as I could have done. And I won't do it again. But I just want to say a couple things in closing. One is, this is not an easy moment for higher education. And one of the most interesting things for me, having been named a college president a couple of months ago, is that literally there isn't a person who I meet who finds out I'm going to be a college president who says, oh God, why would you want to do that right now? And I feel like the course of today's conversation answers that question in every way that matters, right? Like what we do in higher education matters more than ever in our society. And when people are asking in lots of different ways why higher education matters, in ways that seem to suggest we are off track, and maybe we are in some places, in some particular instances, there's just no question that the most important and central answer to that is what we can do to transform our society. How we achieve that through social, economic, civic, political mobility. And in creating the Social Mobility Lab, what we really did was give voice to work that is already going on, tremendous work across CUNY, and as we're going to learn now over the next year, across the country, because we've opened up the program to grantees at colleges and universities across the United States. And it is happening, particularly here at CUNY, in very tangible ways. In, as Bob says, our student success programs, all of the initiatives that we have in place to actually support students, change their trajectories, and really fulfill their own determination to change their paths, the paths of their families, their communities, and our society. What is so special about the Social Mobility Lab is that it is giving voice to that and building community for it at the place that it does it better than anybody else. And, I'm not saying anything that hasn't already been said, but for me, listening to the presentations today, as someone was part of the conversations to get the lab started, but hasn't been present for all of the brown bags, I was just deeply impressed by the quality and range of work that we are supporting. And I know that work was going to be happening in most instances, whether we existed or we didn't exist. But what I think we've done by creating a Social Mobility Lab is a couple of things. One, we have built a community of folks who should stay in conversation with each other. And by doing that, sharpen the questions that they're asking, figure out how they can, find better and stronger data and bring together stronger findings that can help tell the story about why higher education is doing such important work. Two, we're doing it in ways that have a direct effect and are directly informed by our students. And that's pretty special. As somebody who's come to a number, I go to research events fairly frequently, and even go to workshops like these with some frequency. I've never had one that started with the two keynotes that we had from our students. And I want to thank them so much for sharing their stories, but also for realizing, I hope, the extent to which they really just frame our work and make all of us proud to be at City College, at CUNY, and in higher education. And so, as we, and the third thing, I guess, which is on my mind, is that people mostly followed your directions. And that is to say, this was a very understandable 3.5 hours. And this was an understandable 3.5 hours among faculty and researchers and graduate students who come from different disciplines, speak different languages in many respects, use different methodologies. And everybody came to the table with an expectation that they needed to be able to share in accessible ways. And for me, I'm a political scientist by training, and I used to study think tanks, which are all about how you can make work translatable. It was wonderful to be able to listen to everyone's work in ways that there wasn't anything that I didn't understand. And that is meaningful for me, but even more as the lab takes on more strength and becomes more considerable, it will be good for the conversations we're having in higher education. Because one of the things I think, going back to where we started about kind of this difficult moment that many of us are asking in higher education is, well, who's going to tell the story? Who's going to defend the sector? Who is going to advance the sector? Whose job is it? Is it college presidents' jobs? Is it institutions' jobs? Is it trade associations' jobs? But the Social Mobility Lab, in my mind, plays a role in that. The work that we can do, if we can make it understandable, is a really powerful testament to why higher education matters. So the fact that we could do this whole thing and have people from so many different backgrounds in the room and all of us come away with an understanding of it is really a testament to our success. So thank you all very much. I have two last things I want to say. First off, all day I've enjoyed this particular slide that has recurred because when it was first brought, it has the word ahas. And I have to say, I just assumed it was a typo. And I have never seen that word written as such, and I just want to draw everyone's attention to it. I have been Googling it a few times, and I still am not sure I'm convinced that it is a real word. But at any rate, I just wanted to draw a reference to it. And secondly, I wanted to, as we finish, thank again our colleagues at Kyndryl. Amy Salcido is here, who I think you weren't here as we first started, but wanted to thank you. She's the president of Kyndryl in the United States. She's somebody that I met maybe almost a year ago now, at a dinner, and we started to talk about the work we do at City College and what we had in mind for the Social Mobility Lab, and she instantly got it and really has a commitment personally, and Kyndryl as a company has a commitment to what it is we are trying to accomplish at City College, at CUNY, and really in particular here at the Social Mobility Lab. And so we're so grateful to have had you here with us today, and so grateful to continue the partnership. Thank you, everyone. I want to thank all of my faculty colleagues who have been working on this for so long, but for being to this point in the effort to do it together for the Social Mobility Lab. Thank you to Daniel Hila, who is our both events manager and our program manager for this project. So many other people, and then most especially Bob Mckinnon, for whom this was really a passion project, and one that when I started as dean 6 years ago, he brought to me, and I ignored him for 4 years. But he just kept talking about it, and now it is a reality, and it's a thanks to your hard work. So thank you all very much. Have a good afternoon.